Daniel, do not speak to your ex until you see me, my lawyer said, and in that second, the air in my office felt thinner, like someone had quietly opened a window in the middle of winter and let the cold roll in. I was sitting at my desk, halfway through reviewing a contract, coffee still warm at my right hand, the clock on the wall ticking toward 3:17 p.m., and I remember thinking this had to be about paperwork, maybe a missed signature from the divorce 6 months ago. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-altering. Just legal cleanup. Is this about custody scheduling? I asked. There was a pause on the other end, not long, but long enough to settle heavy in my chest. Daniel, Michael said again, slower this time. Just come in. Now. I drove the 12 miles to his downtown office without turning on the radio. Traffic on I-75 crawled like it always does on a weekday afternoon, brake lights glowing red in the gray drizzle, and I kept telling myself this was procedural. Routine. I've learned over the years that panic solves nothing. I've built my life on staying steady, steady job, steady mortgage payments, steady weekends with my daughter, Sophie. 12 years old. Brown hair, stubborn colic on the left side she refuses to fix, calls me dad with that half-smile like it's our private joke. When I walked into Michael's office, he didn't offer coffee. He didn't make small talk. There was a white envelope on his desk, my name printed across the front. He slid it toward me without a word. I didn't rush. I opened it carefully, like it might tear if I moved too fast. The first thing I saw was the word paternity. The second thing I saw was 0% probability. It's strange what the mind does in moments like that. It doesn't explode. It narrows. The hum of the fluorescent lights above us got louder. The room felt smaller. I read the number again. 0. Not low. Not questionable. 0. There has to be a mistake, I said, and even to my own ears, my voice sounded calm, almost detached. Michael folded his hands. It was filed 8 months ago. Your ex-wife requested it be sealed. 8 months. That's when Sophie started pulling away. That's when Olivia began insisting exchanges happen at school instead of at the house. That's when the tone of her emails shifted from tense to strategic. I didn't slam the paper down. I didn't curse. I just stared at that number and thought about a hospital room 12 years ago, about holding a 6-pound baby wrapped in a pink blanket, about promising I would always show up. Blood makes biology. I understand that. But I was there for every scraped knee, every math test meltdown, every Saturday morning pancake. And the hardest part wasn't the number on the page. It was the realization that Olivia already knew. She knew, and she let me keep building a life on something she had quietly dismantled. I looked up at Michael and asked the only question that mattered. Does Sophie know? Michael did not answer right away, and that silence told me more than any number on the page ever could. He leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes steady, measured, the way a man looks when he knows the truth is going to land hard no matter how gently he delivers it. We cannot confirm that, he said carefully. But there are indicators she may have been made aware. Indicators. That was the word he chose. Not proof. Not certainty. Just enough to let doubt spread like a crack through glass. I stared at the report again, at the clinical language that reduced 12 years of bedtime stories and school recitals to statistics. 8 months ago. I replayed that timeline in my head. 8 months ago was when Olivia insisted Sophie start therapy. She said it was for adjustment, for the divorce, for stability. I agreed without hesitation. I always agreed when it came to Sophie. 8 months ago was also when Sophie stopped hugging me at drop-off. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just a small shift. A half step back. A polite smile instead of running into my arms. I had told myself it was adolescence. 12 is complicated. 12 is quiet doors and headphones and secrets. I asked Michael another question. Why seal it? He folded his hands on the desk. To control timing, he said. To manage leverage. The word leverage felt heavier than 0%. That meant strategy. That meant planning. That meant this was not a sudden discovery but a calculated move. I drove home slower than usual that evening, hands at 10 and 2 like I was back in driver education, mind running through every memory of the past year. The soccer game in April when Olivia would not let me take Sophie for ice cream afterward because she said she had plans. The parent-teacher conference she rescheduled without telling me. The way she began copying her attorney on routine emails about homework and doctor appointments. It was subtle. It was organized. And I missed it because I trusted the foundation I thought we built. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always did. 2-story colonial, white siding, blue shutters, porch light already on even though the sun had not fully set. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I sat in the parked car for a full minute, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, and tried to separate biology from fatherhood. I tried to separate anger from clarity. I did not feel rage. I felt something colder. Not toward Sophie. Never toward her. But toward the quiet architecture of a plan that used a child as a bargaining chip. I took a slow breath and reached for my phone. There was a message from Olivia sent 2 hours earlier. Reminder. Exchange this Friday will be at school. Please be on time. No emotion. No warmth. Just instruction. I read it twice and then looked back at the report in my briefcase on the passenger seat. 8 months. If she knew, then every decision since then had context I was never given. And if Sophie knew, even partially, then the distance in her eyes was not confusion. It was protection. I whispered one sentence to the empty car, steady and controlled. What did you tell my daughter? I did not text Olivia back that night. I did not ask questions over a glowing screen where words could be twisted and stored. Instead, I waited. Friday came with the kind of bright, indifferent sunshine that makes everything look normal from a distance. I arrived at Sophie's middle school 10 minutes early, parked along the curb beneath a maple tree that was just starting to turn gold. Kids poured out of the double doors in waves, backpacks bouncing, voices loud, life moving forward like nothing in the world was fragile. Then I saw her. She walked slower than the others, shoulders slightly rounded, headphones around her neck instead of over her ears. When her eyes found me, she hesitated for half a second. It was small. Most people would not have noticed. I did. I stepped out of the car and gave her the same smile I always do. Calm. Open. Safe. She walked over and slid into the passenger seat without saying much. Hey, kiddo, I said gently. Hey, she answered, staring straight ahead as she buckled her seatbelt. Her voice was polite. Careful. We drove 2 miles before I spoke again. How was math test? I asked. She shrugged. It was fine. Not bad. Not good. Just fine. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. I did not rush. Sophie, I said after a moment, my tone even. Can I ask you something important? She glanced at me, then back at the windshield. Okay. There was no fear in her eyes. Just preparation. Has Mom talked to you about anything different lately? About me? The question hung in the car like humidity before a storm. She swallowed once. Not dramatic. Just noticeable. She said adults sometimes figure things out later, Sophie said quietly. About biology. The words sounded rehearsed. Too precise for a 12-year-old to choose on her own. My chest tightened, but my voice did not. And what did she say about that? I asked. Sophie traced a finger along the seam of her jeans. She said it does not change who takes care of me, she whispered. But she also said some people might not want to stay if things are not theirs. Not theirs. I nodded slowly, absorbing each syllable. And what do you think? I asked her. She finally looked at me fully then, eyes searching my face like she was trying to measure something. I think you never missed a game, she said. I think you still make terrible pancakes. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. And I think you always show up. I felt something settle inside me, not relief, not victory, but clarity. Olivia had introduced the idea. She had planted doubt carefully, strategically. But Sophie was still watching my actions, not her words. I reached over and squeezed her hand once, steady and certain. "I am not going anywhere," I told her. And I meant it, not as biology, not as obligation, but as choice. After I told Sophie I was not going anywhere, she nodded like she had been waiting for that answer longer than she wanted to admit. We drove the rest of the way in a quiet that did not feel heavy anymore, just thoughtful. That evening she sat at the kitchen counter doing homework while I made dinner, the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and the low hum of the dishwasher grounding me in something real. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the way she chewed lightly on the end of her pencil. Biology did not teach me those details. Time did. Showing up did. After she went to bed, I sat alone at the dining room table with the folder Michael had given me. I read the report again, slower this time, not as a father but as a man preparing for a shift in terrain. 8 months ago, Olivia sealed the results. That meant intention. That meant she waited for the right moment to use it. I opened my laptop and pulled up the trust documents I created 6 years ago, back when Sophie was still missing her 2 front teeth and believed every problem could be solved with a bandage and a hug. The trust was simple, clean, designed to cover tuition, living expenses, and anything she needed when she turned 18. Olivia never objected to it because it benefited Sophie. She did not know I structured it independently, outside of marital assets, protected from custody adjustments. I called Michael the next morning. "I do not want a public fight," I told him. "I want clarity and protection." He understood immediately. We discussed filing a motion to unseal all related documents, and request a review of the timeline surrounding the test. Not to punish. To expose sequence. If Olivia knew, and if she influenced Sophie's perception while withholding information from me, that mattered legally. That mattered ethically. I was not interested in financial retaliation. I was interested in removing leverage. That afternoon, Olivia sent another email about next week's schedule, tone efficient as always. I read it carefully and then responded with equal calm. "We need to discuss the recently discovered documentation regarding Sophie. I will be pursuing formal review. No accusations. No emotion. Just structure." 10 minutes later my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. I was not ready for her voice. Yet. Not until I understood every piece on the board. I walked outside onto the back porch and looked out at the yard where Sophie learned to ride a bike, wobbling across 12 feet of uneven grass before finding balance. I remembered running beside her, one hand steady at the seat, not holding her back, just making sure she did not fall alone. That is what fatherhood is. Not possession. Presence. And if Olivia believed a report could erase that, she underestimated something fundamental. Blood can define origin. But commitment defines identity. And I was about to make sure the court understood the difference. Olivia did not wait long before responding. By the next morning, her attorney had emailed Michael requesting an urgent conference call. The language was polished, restrained, almost casual, but the timing said everything. They had not expected me to move first. I arrived at Michael's office again 3 days later, the same gray carpet, the same steady hum of fluorescent lights, but this time I felt different. Not shocked. Not wounded. Focused. Michael slid a new document across the desk, a motion to unseal the original filing and request clarification on the timeline of disclosure. "Once this is submitted," he said calmly, "it becomes part of the record." That was the point. I did not want confrontation in a parking lot or an emotional exchange in a driveway. I wanted structure. I wanted sequence. That afternoon, Olivia finally called directly. I answered. Her voice was controlled, almost irritated. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked. "Not how are you. Not we need to talk. Just what are you doing?" I kept my tone level. "I am asking for transparency," I said. A brief silence followed. This does not change anything, she replied. Sophie is stable. You are overreacting. Overreacting. The words settled in my chest without stirring anything. You sealed the results, I said quietly. You introduced biology into her vocabulary before I even knew there was a conversation. Her breath shifted on the line, subtle but noticeable. I was protecting her, she answered. From what? I asked. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she pivoted. If you pursue this publicly, it will confuse her. That was when I understood the full architecture of her strategy. The implication was clear. Silence maintains control. Exposure risks instability. But silence also keeps leverage intact. I am not interested in destabilizing her, I said. I am interested in ensuring no one manipulates her understanding of who she can trust. She exhaled sharply. You are not her biological father. The words landed without impact. I had already absorbed them. That is a fact, I said. But facts do not cancel history. She did not argue with that. Instead, she shifted again, softer this time. Daniel, we can handle this privately. I thought about Sophie's careful tone in the car, the rehearsed precision of the word biology, the way she watched my face for confirmation that I would stay. Private had already been used to shape her perception. No, I said calmly. We will handle this correctly. After I ended the call, I walked outside into the cool afternoon air. The sky was clear, a wide Midwestern blue stretching uninterrupted above the courthouse across the street. I felt no anger. Just resolution. If Olivia believed biology was a lever, she underestimated something far more durable. I had chosen Sophie every single day for 12 years. And now, I was choosing her again, not as a reaction, not as a defense, but as a deliberate stand. The difference between origin and loyalty would soon be documented. And once it was written into record, it would not be sealed again. The motion was filed on a Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m., stamped and entered into the record before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. Michael sent me a copy the moment it cleared. I read it slowly at my kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor, Sophie's backpack resting by the door from the night before. The language was precise, unemotional, structured to do one thing: establish sequence. When was the test conducted? When were the results received? When were they sealed? And most importantly, when was the minor child informed? Facts have weight when they are placed in order. By noon, Olivia's attorney responded with a request for mediation instead of immediate hearing. That shift told me the timeline mattered more than they expected. Mediation means control behind closed doors. Hearing means record. I called Michael. We proceed, I said. No hesitation. That afternoon, I picked Sophie up again from school. The sky had turned overcast, a soft gray blanket stretching across the horizon. She climbed into the car with a folder in her lap. I got a B+, she said quietly. I smiled. That is solid work. We drove a mile before she spoke again. Mom seemed stressed this morning. She added, almost casually. I kept my eyes on the road. Adults get stressed when paperwork changes, I replied evenly. She studied my profile for a moment. Are you mad? She asked. The question was direct. I did not answer quickly. No, I said after a breath. I am clear. She nodded slowly, as if weighing the difference between those two words. That evening, after she finished her homework, she lingered in the kitchen instead of heading straight to her room. If someone is not your biological parent, she asked carefully, can they still decide things? I leaned against the counter, choosing honesty without burden. Courts look at many factors, I explained. Time, stability, responsibility, love. I let the last word sit gently, not heavy, not dramatic. Love counts? She asked. It does, I said. And I believed it. Later that night, Michael called again. We have confirmation, he said. The results were received 9 months ago. Sophie's therapist was notified 6 weeks later. I closed my eyes briefly. That meant structured introduction, guided language, managed exposure. And me? I asked. You were not formally notified until now, he replied. That was the missing piece. Not oversight. Omission. There is a difference. I stepped outside onto the porch again, cool air brushing against my face. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights flickering on one by one. Inside that stillness, I understood something fundamental. Olivia's strategy relied on uncertainty. On the idea that biology would cause me to retreat, to question my place, to step back voluntarily. But clarity has its own momentum. Once the timeline was documented, once the record reflected deliberate withholding, the leverage dissolved. I did not need anger to move forward. I needed consistency. And I had already practiced that for 12 years. Tomorrow, the court would see the sequence. And once sequence becomes record, narrative changes. The hearing date was set for 2 weeks later, a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, courtroom 3 on the second floor. I marked it on my calendar without emotion, just ink on paper, a fixed point in time. In the days leading up to it, nothing about my routine changed. I went to work. I reviewed contracts. I returned emails. I picked Sophie up from school and asked about her day. Stability is not loud. It is repetitive. On Sunday afternoon, we sat at the dining room table working through a science project about ecosystems. She was building a small model of a freshwater pond, carefully placing plastic reeds along the edge of a blue construction paper circle. Everything depends on balance, she said, reading from her textbook. If one part changes, the whole system adjusts. I looked at her hands arranging the pieces. She did not realize how accurate that statement was. And what keeps it stable? I asked. She scanned the page. Clear roles, she answered. Each organism knowing where it fits. I nodded slowly. Clear roles. That was exactly what had been disrupted. Later that evening, Olivia sent a brief message confirming she would attend the hearing in person. No hostility. No apology. Just confirmation. I responded the same way. The night before court, Sophie stood in the kitchen doorway watching me rinse a coffee mug. Are you going to fight? She asked quietly. I dried my hands on a towel before turning toward her. I am going to explain, I said. There is a difference. She studied that for a moment. Mom says courts decide facts, she added. They do, I replied. But facts are clearer when everyone tells the whole story. She seemed satisfied with that, at least for now. Wednesday morning arrived with crisp air and pale sunlight reflecting off the courthouse windows. I wore a navy suit I had not put on since the divorce finalized, the fabric fitting the same but feeling different on my shoulders. Inside the courtroom, everything felt measured. Wood benches. Soft echoes. Low conversations between attorneys. Olivia sat across the aisle, posture straight, expression composed. We did not make eye contact. When the judge entered, the room shifted into quiet focus. Michael presented the timeline first. Dates. Filings. Notifications. He did not accuse. He did not dramatize. He simply laid out sequence. Then he highlighted the omission. The sealed report. The delay in disclosure. The introduction of biological uncertainty to the minor child before informing the legal father. The word legal carried weight. It anchored history in something tangible. Olivia's attorney argued privacy, emotional protection, sensitivity. All valid concepts. But privacy does not justify exclusion when parental standing is involved. The judge listened carefully, flipping through the documented dates. After a pause, she looked directly at Olivia. Why was the petitioner not notified when the results were received? She asked. The question hung in the room, clear and unavoidable. For the first time since this began, I saw uncertainty cross Olivia's face. Not panic. Just recognition that sequence matters. I did not speak unless addressed. I did not interrupt. I sat steady, hands folded, aware that sometimes restraint carries more authority than reaction. When the judge announced that the sealed documents would be fully reviewed and that temporary parental status would remain unchanged pending evaluation, I felt something shift quietly in my favor. Not victory. Alignment. The record now reflected more than biology. It reflected intent. And once intent enters record, leverage loses power. When we stepped out of the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter than it had that morning, sunlight pouring through tall windows and casting long lines across the marble floor. Olivia walked several feet ahead, her heels clicking in controlled rhythm, her attorney speaking quietly beside her. She did not look back. I did not call out. Some conversations are not meant for hallways. Michael stood next to me, briefcase in hand. That was significant, he said calmly. The judge noticed the sequence. I nodded. It was not celebration I felt. It was confirmation. The system does not react to emotion. It responds to order. And for the first time since this began, the order reflected more than a number on a report. That afternoon, I picked Sophie up as usual. She slid into the passenger seat and studied my face for a moment before asking, "How did it go?" I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. "The judge wants to review everything," I said. "That means she wants the full story." Sophie leaned back slightly, absorbing that. "Is that good?" she asked. "It is fair," I answered. And fairness was the only word that mattered. At home, she worked on her science project again, carefully adjusting the paper reeds around the pond model. "If you remove one species," she said absent-mindedly, reading aloud from her notes, "the ecosystem has to rebalance." I watched her glue a small plastic turtle near the edge. "Sometimes rebalancing makes it stronger," I replied. She glanced at me and gave a small nod, as if she understood more than she was saying. Later that evening, Michael called with an update. The court had requested full disclosure of communication between Olivia and the therapist regarding the introduction of biological information. Not to assign blame, but to evaluate timing and impact. That detail mattered. The law recognizes biology, but it also recognizes established parental bonds. 12 years of documented involvement carries weight. I stepped outside onto the porch again, the night air cool and steady. Across the street, a neighbor was watering his lawn, the soft arc of water catching porch light in quiet repetition. Ordinary life continued unchanged. Inside, Sophie laughed at something on television, a sound that cut clean through the tension of the past weeks. I realized then that Olivia's strategy depended on one assumption, that I would retreat once confronted with biology. That I would question my place. That uncertainty would weaken my stance. Instead, clarity strengthened it. The court had not stripped me of anything. It had acknowledged continuity while it reviewed facts. And continuity is built over time, not in a laboratory. The next hearing would examine more details. Emails. Dates. Language. But regardless of what surfaced, one truth remained constant. I had been present for every mile marker of Sophie's life. First steps across living room carpet. First day of kindergarten with a backpack almost too large for her shoulders. First time she rode a bike without training wheels across 12 feet of uneven grass. Those moments do not dissolve under fluorescent lighting in a lab. They exist in memory and record alike. And as the process moved forward, I felt steady. Not because I knew every outcome, but because I knew my position was rooted in choice, not accident. Biology can introduce questions. Commitment answers them. And I had already given my answer. The request for full disclosure changed the tone of everything that followed. 3 days after the hearing, Michael forwarded me a packet of documents released under court order. I sat at the same dining room table where Sophie had built her ecosystem model and opened the files slowly, not bracing for impact, just preparing for clarity. The emails were timestamped. Olivia had written to the therapist 9 months ago, the day after receiving the results. Her message was measured, strategic. She asked how to Introduce biological context without destabilizing primary attachment. Primary attachment. That was the phrase she used to describe me. Not father. Not parent. Attachment. I read the line twice, then a third time. Words matter. Language frames perception. The therapist responded carefully, suggesting gradual exposure and reassurance that caretaking roles remain valid regardless of genetic findings. That sentence should have comforted me. Instead, it confirmed sequence. The conversation began without me. It evolved without me. And it shaped Sophie's understanding before I even knew there was something to explain. That evening, Sophie sat across from me at the kitchen counter finishing her homework. "We talked about identity in class today," she said casually. "About what makes people who they are." I listened closely. "And what did you decide?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "It is not just where you come from," she said slowly. "It is who stays." I felt that sentence settle deeper than any courtroom ruling. She was not quoting a textbook. She was reasoning through her own experience. I nodded once. "That is a strong definition," I replied. Later that night, I reviewed the remaining documents. There were no dramatic revelations. No hidden conspiracies. Just deliberate pacing. A plan to control narrative before facts entered public record. Olivia had not tried to erase me outright. She had tried to reposition me. To shift me from certainty to question mark. To make biology the dominant variable. But the law does not operate on emotional framing. It evaluates conduct. Timeline. Intent. Michael called the next morning. "The judge will weigh parental conduct heavily," he explained. "If your involvement remained consistent after disclosure, that strengthens your standing." I almost laughed at the irony. I had remained consistent because I did not know. And now that I did know, consistency had become choice. I picked Sophie up from school again that afternoon, the sky clear and sharp blue above us. She climbed into the car and adjusted the air vent toward her seat. "Mom says the judge might talk to me," she said quietly. I kept my voice calm. "If she does, just tell the truth," I replied. She looked at me carefully. "What if the truth hurts someone?" I considered that. "Truth does not hurt," I said gently. "It clarifies." As we pulled into the driveway, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Olivia's leverage had depended on uncertainty and timing. But once timing became documented and uncertainty became transparent, the center of gravity returned to conduct. And conduct, over 12 years, had not wavered. I had shown up. I had stayed. I had chosen. And in a system built to measure responsibility, that choice carried more weight than origin ever could. The notice arrived 5 days later in a plain white envelope, stamped with the county seal and delivered with the same ordinary indifference as any utility bill. The court had scheduled an in-camera interview with Sophie, a private conversation between judge and child without attorneys present. When Michael called to explain, his tone remained steady. "This is standard in complex custody reviews," he said. "The judge wants to understand her perspective directly." I thanked him and ended the call, then sat quietly in my office chair for a full minute, absorbing the weight of what that meant. Sophie would speak for herself. Not coached. Not filtered. Not framed through adult strategy. That afternoon, I picked her up from school as usual. The wind carried the first hint of early fall, crisp and clean, scattering leaves across the parking lot. She climbed into the car and immediately sensed something had shifted. "It is about the judge, right?" she asked before I even started the engine. I nodded once. "She would like to talk to you privately," I said gently. Sophie stared out the windshield for a moment, watching another parent wave from across the lot. "Do I have to choose?" she asked quietly. The question was not dramatic. It was tired. I took a slow breath. "No," I said clearly. "You are not choosing between people. You are explaining how you feel." She considered that carefully. "What if how I feel changes things?" she asked. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the steady way she met my eyes. Then it means the court understands reality better, I replied. That night, she sat at the kitchen table again, flipping through flashcards while I made dinner. The house felt normal. Dishwasher humming. Stove clicking softly as it cooled. Ordinary sounds anchoring an extraordinary week. Mom says biology is important, she said suddenly, without looking up. I did not rush to answer. Biology explains origin, I said evenly. But responsibility explains commitment. She placed one flashcard face down and folded her hands on the table. You never left, she said. It was not a question. It was an observation. No, I answered. Later, after she went to bed, I stood in the hallway outside her room for a moment, listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing. I thought about the past 12 years not as sentiment, but as record. Parent-teacher meetings. Medical forms signed. Emergency contacts listed. Birthday parties hosted. Consistency is measurable. It leaves paper trails and memories alike. The interview was scheduled for Monday morning at 9. I would not be present. Olivia would not be present. For the first time in this process, either of us would control the framing. And strangely, that gave me calm. Because whatever narrative had been constructed in careful emails and sealed documents would now meet something far simpler. A 12-year-old explaining who showed up. The truth does not need volume. It needs space. And on Monday, the court would give her that space. Whatever followed would not be about leverage anymore. It would be about clarity. Monday morning arrived with a kind of stillness that made every small sound feel amplified. The clock in the kitchen ticked louder than usual as Sophie finished a piece of toast she barely touched. She wore a navy sweater and jeans, simple and neat, like she was going to school instead of a courthouse. I drove her downtown in quiet focus, the city just beginning to stir, traffic lights shifting from red to green in steady rhythm. When we pulled into the parking garage, she unbuckled her seatbelt but did not reach for the door handle right away. What if I say something wrong? She asked softly. I turned toward her, keeping my voice level. There is no wrong when you are honest, I said. Just speak about what you know. She nodded once, absorbing that like she does when she is memorizing something important. Inside the courthouse lobby, the floors echoed under our steps. Olivia stood near the security entrance with her attorney, posture straight, expression unreadable. Sophie glanced at her mother, then back at me. No words passed between us. An attendant led Sophie down the hallway toward the judge's chambers. The door closed gently behind her. And then there was nothing to do but wait. Time moves differently in waiting rooms. Minutes stretch. Conversations from across the hall blur into background noise. I sat on a wooden bench, hands folded, not rehearsing arguments, not predicting outcomes. Just steady. After about 30 minutes, the door opened. Sophie stepped out first, her face composed but thoughtful. The judge followed briefly to thank both parents and confirm that the court would issue a written decision within the week. No hint. No signal. Just procedure. In the elevator on the way down, Sophie stood beside me in silence. When the doors closed, she finally spoke. She asked who helps with homework, she said quietly. She asked who takes me to the doctor. She asked who comes to school stuff. I listened without interrupting. And what did you tell her? I asked gently. Sophie looked straight ahead. I told her the truth, she said. I told her you never miss things unless you cannot help it. My chest tightened slightly, not from shock, but from recognition. The truth is rarely dramatic. It is repetitive. When we reached the parking garage, she paused before getting into the car. I also said Mom loves me, she added quickly, as if balancing scales. I nodded. That is important, I said. Love does not have to be exclusive to be real. That afternoon, I dropped her back at school for afternoon classes. As she stepped out of the car, she leaned back in for a second. You are still my dad, she said plainly. Not emotionally. Not defensively. Just factual. I watched her walk toward the building, backpack shifting on her shoulders, and understood something with complete clarity. The court would review documents. It would analyze timing and intent. But it had already heard the one voice that mattered most. And that voice did not speak in percentages or sealed filings. It spoke in presence. Whatever the written decision said, the foundation had already been articulated. Not in strategy. Not in leverage. In lived experience. The written decision arrived 4 days later by certified mail, the envelope thick enough to signal that it carried more than a simple confirmation. I opened it at the kitchen counter while Sophie was still at school, the afternoon light stretching long across the tile floor. The judge's language was measured and deliberate, every sentence balanced between law and lived reality. The court acknowledged the biological findings without hesitation. It recognized the timeline of disclosure. It noted the sealed filing and the delayed notification. But then it shifted focus. It described 12 years of continuous parental involvement, documented care, and emotional stability. It referenced school records, medical forms, and testimony regarding consistency. It concluded that parental standing is not determined solely by genetics when an established bond exists and has been actively maintained. Temporary status would remain in effect pending final adjustment of language, but the court saw no grounds to sever or diminish my role. I read that paragraph twice, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to understand its weight. It was not a dramatic victory. It was recognition. That evening, when I picked Sophie up from school, she noticed the envelope on the passenger seat. "Is that it?" she asked quietly. I nodded once. "The judge wrote her decision," I said. Sophie folded her hands in her lap. "Are we okay?" she asked. The word "we" carried more meaning than any legal term in that document. "We are steady," I replied. She let out a small breath, almost imperceptible, but enough to release tension she had been carrying for weeks. At home, she set her backpack down and looked up at me again. "What does it mean?" she asked. I crouched slightly so we were eye level. "It means the court understands that being a parent is about more than one test result," I said gently. She studied my face, searching for doubt. Finding none, she nodded. Later that night, Olivia called. Her voice was controlled but edged with something new, not anger, not fear, but acceptance. "I did not expect the language to be that strong," she admitted. I did not respond immediately. "Sequence matters," I said calmly. There was a pause. "I never meant to remove you," she said softly. I considered that carefully. "Intent is measured by action," I replied. The conversation ended without argument. Outside, the air had turned cooler, the first signs of fall settling in. I stepped onto the porch and looked out at the yard where Sophie once practiced riding her bike, wobbling forward in uncertain circles until balance found her. Balance is not about denying gravity. It is about adjusting to it. Biology introduced gravity into our lives. The court did not deny it. But it adjusted to the full picture. Inside, Sophie was laughing at something on television, her voice bright and uncomplicated. The document on the counter did not erase the past month. It did not erase the biology either. But it clarified position. I had not lost my place. I had not been reduced to a question mark. The record now reflected what I had always known in quieter terms. Parenthood is proven over miles, not moments. And 12 years of miles had been acknowledged. In the weeks that followed the decision, life did not erupt into celebration. It returned to rhythm. That was the real outcome. Tuesday nights meant grocery runs and comparing prices per ounce in aisle 5. Thursday afternoons meant soccer practice under bright stadium lights that hummed against the early evening sky. Sophie moved through her days with a steadiness that told me something important had settled inside her. Not erased. Settled. One evening after practice, we sat on the tailgate of my truck in the parking lot, the air cool enough to hint at deeper autumn. She unlaced her cleats slowly, thoughtful. "Mom says things will look different on paper soon," she said. I nodded. The court would adjust language, clarify legal standing, redefine terms. Paper always catches up to reality eventually. Different does not mean unstable, I replied. She considered that while pulling off her shin guards. Do you ever wish it was simpler? She asked. The question was not about biology. It was about complexity. I thought about that carefully. Simple is comfortable, I said. But clarity is stronger. She leaned back on her hands and looked up at the sky, where a faint crescent moon was already visible. I am glad you did not leave, she said quietly. There was no drama in her voice. Just truth. I smiled slightly. Leaving was never on the table, I answered. Over the next few days, adjustments began. Michael drafted final modifications to reflect continued parental status under established bond doctrine. Olivia did not contest them. The resistance that once shaped her tone had softened into practicality. We spoke briefly one afternoon during an exchange at school. No attorneys. No raised voices. Just two adults standing beside a blue sedan and a silver SUV. I did not expect it to unfold like this, she admitted. I met her gaze evenly. Sequence matters, I repeated. She nodded once, acknowledging the lesson without arguing it. At home, Sophie rearranged the ecosystem project on her desk, moving the plastic turtle slightly closer to the reeds. Everything adjusts, she said absently when she noticed me watching. I leaned against the doorway. That is what balance does, I replied. Later that night, as I turned off the lights downstairs, I paused by the dining room table where this entire chapter had begun with a sealed envelope and a number that tried to redefine history. The number still existed. Biology had not changed. But its weight had shifted. It no longer dictated position. It no longer held leverage. It simply sat as one fact among many. Upstairs, Sophie laughed softly at something on her phone before saying goodnight. The house felt grounded, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Parenthood had been measured, questioned, documented, and ultimately affirmed not by sentiment, but by consistency. I had shown up when there was uncertainty. I had stayed when there was gravity. And in the end, the record reflected what daily life had already proven. Biology explains where life begins. Commitment explains where it continues.